Welcome to the J-Spot, the place where we stimulate the most sensitive parts of your brain.
And today we are stimulating the parts responsible for how you actually see the world. We're looking at a stack of research that suggests the map you use to navigate reality, specifically the political map, is just completely wrong.
It is Friday, February 27, 2026. And if you are anything like me, you're probably feeling, a little burnt out by the news cycle. It just feels like every single day there's a new outrage, a new battle line drawn, and this constant pressure to pick a team. Are you team red or are you team blue?
Which is exactly why we are tossing that map completely out the window today. The data we have pulled for this deep dive, and it is a really heavy stack, ranging from court documents on high-profile trafficking cases to sociological studies on moral panics, all argue that the traditional left versus right spectrum is obsolete. It is a ghost.
So if left versus right is dead, what is the new axis? Because looking at these documents, it feels a lot less like a horizontal line and, a lot more like a vertical one.
That is exactly how the researchers frame it. They argue the real battle is the elite predator class versus the rest of us.
I know that sounds a little conspiratorial right off the bat, like we are about to put on tinfoil hats.
It does sound that way, I admit. But when you actually read the reports detailing the financial networks of people like Jeffrey Epstein or the data on how our child welfare systems operate, a terrifyingly clear picture emerges. The argument isn't that the system is broken. We hear that all the time, right? People say the justice system is broken or child protection is broken.
Right, that is the standard line. It's always framed as incompetence or too much bureaucracy.
But the thesis here is, what if it isn't broken? What if it is captured? What if the machinery is doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is to protect a very specific class of people while policing everyone else?
And that is the exact spot we are hitting today. We are going to unpack three specific areas. First, the architecture of complicity that protects wealthy predators.
Yeah.
Second, the distraction machine, meaning how moral panics are engineered to keep you looking the wrong way. And third, the staggering hypocrisy of the whole protect the children rhetoric.
And we should definitely warn you listening right now, this deep dive goes to some very dark places. We are talking about trafficking, systemic abuse, and state violence.
So buckle up. Let's start with the predators. We all know the names. Epstein, Peter Nygard. When we talk about them in the media, we usually use words like monster or deviant.
Right, we frame them as werewolves.
Werewolves.
Yes, as these lone, scary creatures that act totally outside of society, like they are glitches in the Matrix.
Because that is comforting, right? It is so much easier to sleep at night thinking there was just one bad apple rather than a completely rotten orchard.
Precisely. But the analysis of these massive trafficking organizations destroys that comfort entirely. The researchers argue these men aren't glitches at all. They are features. They are products of a system that is literally designed for elite impunity.
Okay, let's double-click on that, because one of the most fascinating and, frankly, surprising distinctions in the research is the separation between commercial trafficking and elite trafficking. I always just assumed trafficking was trafficking.
That is a super common assumption. But it really comes down to the bottom line. Commercial trafficking, the street-level stuff run by gangs or cartels, is about revenue. It is a business. You exploit victims to generate profit to pay the bills.
Okay, so money in, money out.
But elite sex trafficking is a cost center. It burns money. Think about it. These guys were already billionaires. They did not need to traffic women to pay their rent.
Right, they weren't doing it for cash.
No, not at all. They siphoned millions from their legitimate businesses, whether it was fashion empires or financial management firms, to fund this massive infrastructure of abuse. We are talking planes, private islands, fixers, lawyers, recruiters. It was a huge financial drain.
So if it is a cost center, what are they actually buying?
They are buying power. They are buying access. The research calls it the capo trafficante model. You accumulate victims to gratify yourself, sure, but also to gain leverage over other powerful people. It becomes this currency of corruption. Basically, if I have dirt on you, I own you.
That makes total sense. But to pull that off on such a massive scale, you need more than just money. You need people to actively look the other way.
You need what sociologists call hegemonic respect.
Hegemonic respect. That is a heavy term. Break that down for us.
It is essentially the halo effect on steroids. If you donate millions to an Ivy League school, if you are photographed smiling with princes and presidents, if you sit on the board of a major charity, you build an ironclad alibi. Society just assumes a man in a tuxedo standing next to a Nobel laureate cannot possibly be a predator.
It acts as a shield. But hold on, though. Being rich makes you powerful, sure. But are we really saying a university donation acts as a get-out-of-jail-free card for international sex trafficking?
Yeah.
How does that actually work in practice?
It works because that social capital translates directly into institutional paralysis. And this brings us to the banks, the real architecture of complicity. The financial reports regarding the major banks that handle these accounts are just damning. They introduce this concept of malleable compliance.
Malleable compliance. That sounds like corporate speak for we shredded the documents.
It is actually more nuanced than that, which honestly makes it worse. Technically, the system worked. The compliance officers flagged the suspicious withdrawals. They saw these huge, unexplained amounts of cash being pulled out to pay young women. The red flags were raised.
So they actually knew.
The lower-level employees absolutely knew.
Right.
But because the client was so powerful, because he was bringing in so much money and had such high-level connections, the compliance became, well, malleable.
Right.
Senior executives stepped in and overruled the safety checks. They wrote waivers. They created workarounds.
So the rules just bent because the weight of the money was too heavy.
Exactly. And then you see the exact same thing in the legal system. The timelines we reviewed show decades of law enforcement failures. And the argument here isn't that the police were just stupid or lazy. It is institutional decay.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning that when a private citizen has a legal team that is better funded and more powerful than the Department of Justice itself, the state just gets paralyzed. The wealthy get to navigate this intricate legal maze designed specifically for them. Endless appeals, non-prosecution agreements, sealed records. Meanwhile, the poor just get hit with a blunt instrument.
That is such a terrifying image.
What the
The maze versus the hammer.
Yeah.
So we have this elite class operating with total impunity, burning millions to abuse women and children. And yet, looking out the window, we aren't rioting in the streets. Why are we letting this happen?
Because we are distracted. And this brings us to the second pillar of our deep dive today, the distraction machine, or in sociological terms, moral panics.
This goes back to the origins of that term, right?
Yes, the classic definition is a situation where a specific group or condition emerges and gets defined as a massive threat to societal values. But the sources we are looking at argue we need to focus on the elite engineered model of this phenomenon.
The elite engineered model.
Wow.
So this suggests it is not just regular people naturally getting scared about something. It is a top-down operation.
Correct. The theory is that elites, whether that is politicians, media moguls, influencers, orchestrate outrage against a folk devil.
A folk devil. Like a scapegoat.
Exactly like a scapegoat. Maybe it is immigrants. Maybe it is drag queens. Maybe it is the concept of a welfare queen. They amplify this perceived threat in a highly stylized and stereotypical fashion to divert your attention.
So while you and I are arguing online about a book in a middle school library, the elites are quietly looting the pension funds or covering up for their predator friends.
Precisely. If you are angry at a folk devil, you are not looking at the man behind the curtain. And in 2026, this has evolved into what researchers now call dual panics.
Oh, I saw that in the research. That couple with the guns in St. Louis was the prime example, right?
Right. And it is a perfect example of how effective this is. You have two sides of the political spectrum panicking about the exact same event, but they are living in completely different realities. One side sees a violent mob threatening a suburban home, and the other side sees racist vigilantes threatening peaceful protesters.
And the media algorithms just feed both sides their specific flavor of outrage.
And what is the result? The grassroots populace just fights each other. We are so busy fighting over these culture war scraps that we don't even notice the entire table is being stolen.
And the most powerful weapon in this culture war, the one that shuts down all rational debate instantly, protecting the children.
It is the ultimate shield. I mean, who can possibly argue against protecting children? It is moral entrepreneurship at its finest. But this leads us to the darkest part of our deep dive today. The unbelievable hypocrisy of it all.
This is the part of the research that honestly just made my blood boil. We have all this loud rhetoric from politicians about saving the children, yet the data shows that the state is actively harming the most vulnerable kids out there.
It is called the turn to the child in policy circles. On the surface, shifting policies to focus on the child looks benevolent. But the research argues that in practice, it actually depoliticizes women's equality and turns child protection into a weapon for policing low-income and racialized mothers.
The hair testing scandal was the prime example mentioned in the documents. Can you walk us through that? Because I think people forget the actual details of how bad that was.
So this involved a program that relied on testing methods used widely across different jurisdictions. They used hair testing to determine if mothers were using drugs or alcohol. The stated goal was to identify bad mothers and remove their children for their own safety.
Okay, but if the science actually works.
But it didn't work. That is the entire point. The tests were deeply fundamentally flawed. They were producing false positives constantly. But the court system treated these lab results as absolute gospel. Thousands of children, disproportionately from indigenous and black families, were ripped away from their mothers based on junk science.
So you have the state literally tearing families apart, claiming they're protecting the child, all based on a lie.
And once those children are trapped in the system, they enter what researchers call the pipeline to prison. You take a kid out of a home to supposedly protect them, and you put them in state care where, statistically, they are far more likely to face abuse, be targeted by traffickers, and eventually end up incarcerated.
It's a complete paradox. The state claims to be the parent of last resort, but the data proves it is often the most neglectful, abusive parent imaginable.
And nothing illustrates the hollowness of this protection rhetoric better than the immigration files we looked at, the stories of Juan and baby Anna.
The file on baby Anna. I actually had to put my tablet down. I just had to walk away for a minute.
It is incredibly hard to read.
She was 13 months old. Can we just pause on that for a second? She is in diapers. She cannot speak. Her mother had just been killed. And the authorities find her at the border. And what do?
They charged her.
They charged the baby.
They charged a 13-month-old infant with entering the country without permission. Instead of treating her as a highly vulnerable victim of trafficking or violence, they placed her in adversarial immigration proceedings.
Adversarial proceedings, meaning she's a defendant. She needs a lawyer.
Correct. A baby needed a defense attorney to argue that she shouldn't be deported back to the exact place where her mother was just murdered. The system prioritized its own bureaucracy and its need to punish over the actual best interests of that child.
And then there is Juan.
8 years old. He fled extreme violence in Honduras with his grandmother, who was his only living caregiver. The system separated them immediately. They locked an 8-year-old boy in federal custody for months, and the grandmother was deported.
So when we hear these politicians screaming into microphones about protecting children from, a teenager reading a library book, we really have to look at Juan and Anna.
Because that is the exact function of the moral panic. It hides the institutional betrayal.
Institutional betrayal. That is a specific sociological concept, isn't it?
Yes. It occurs when a trusted institution, whether that is a school, a church, or the government itself, actively harms the very people who are completely dependent on it. And a huge part of this is institutional cowardice.
Which is when they cover up the abuse just to protect the reputation of the institution, like what we saw with Penn State or the Catholic Church.
Exactly. And like the state itself regarding women's bodies, we have to talk about the war on women in this context because the source material connects this current political climate directly to a long legacy of eugenics.
Right, because it is not new. We tend to think of forced sterilization as this dark, ancient history, but the sources point out it targeted women of color and so-called feeble-minded populations well into the modern era.
And the researchers argue that the current systematic dismantling of reproductive autonomy is the exact same beast. It isn't about life. If it were truly about life and supporting children, these same politicians would be falling over themselves to pass paid family leave. They would support the actual mothers raising these kids.
Instead, we see the opposite. We see family caps on welfare, literally punishing poor women for having more children, while simultaneously forcing other women to give birth against their will.
It is about control. It is about enforcing these rigid, natural roles and ensuring a steady supply of cheap labor. And it is deeply intersectional. This is a crucial point made across all the documents. Wealthy women, the wives and daughters of the elite class, will always be able to access care. They can just quietly fly to where it is legal. It is the poor, the marginalized, the women of color who are subjected to the full violent force of this state control.
So let's try to pull this all together because we have covered a massive amount of ground today. We started by saying the left versus right map is broken.
It is. The map is vertical. It is top-down.
We have an elite predator class. They traffic in power. They use their immense wealth to buy hegemonic respect and to secure malleable compliance from financial institutions and the law. They essentially turn their abuse into just another cost of doing business.
And to keep us from noticing any of this, to keep us from looking directly at that architecture of complicity, they feed us elite-engineered moral panics. They tell us the real threat to society is the immigrant, the drag queen, the bad mother.
And while we are down here fighting those ghosts, the state, the very institution that is supposed to protect us, is separating 8-year-olds from their grandmothers, putting babies on trial, and stripping women of their fundamental bodily autonomy.
It is a complete and utter betrayal of the social contract.
So what does this actually mean? Why does this matter to the person listening to us right now?
It matters because as long as you are fighting their culture war, you are playing their game. You are an active participant in the distraction. The core realization here is that the intense outrage you feel when you watch the evening news, it might be entirely manufactured.
It is realizing that the monster isn't hiding under the bed. The monster is the bed. The monster is the very architecture of the house we are living in.
And that brings us to the final provocation for today. We constantly hear people ask, why is the system so broken? Why is it failing to protect children? Why is it failing women so badly?
But based on this massive stack of sources, you are saying that is just the wrong question entirely.
It is the wrong question. If you look closely at the outcomes, if you look at who gets rich, who gets protected no matter what, and who gets punished mercilessly, you have to stop asking why the system is broken. You have to start admitting that the system is working exactly as it was intended to work. It was designed from the ground up to protect the powerful and police the vulnerable.
And once you admit that, once you stop trying to fix a machine that is doing exactly what it was built to do,
then you have to ask yourself what you're actually going to do about it. Because reform isn't the right word for what is needed when the machine itself is captured.
That is a heavy, heavy thought to leave you with, but that is exactly why we are here. To stimulate those sensitive parts of the brain, even when it hurts.
Especially when it hurts.
The J Spot is a Jay Briar Allen production, edited by Jay Rivera, Danielle Reyes, and Jessica Garcia.